We're going to focus now on rule number 8, which is entitled Course Played as It Is Found. But we're going to focus primarily on a term called conditions affecting the stroke. We're going to talk about the actions that are considered to improve the conditions affecting the stroke. We're also going to talk about some of the things that you can or are allowed to do that even if they do result in improvement, you would not get penalized. So it's important to know what it means to improve the conditions affecting the stroke, but it's also important to know that you can technically improve some of these things as long as you're doing them in the course of properly playing the game. So a central principle of the game is to play the course as you find it. The two great principles are play the ball as it lies, play the course as you find it. We are covering a very specific or central principle here in that we're talking about playing the course as you find it. So one of the questions we get a lot is how come they haven't changed the rules to allow for relief from a divot in the fairway? And there's sort of two answers to that. The one probably more logical answer is that the problem, if you ever instituted that rule, would be determining when a divot is no longer a divot. You know, at what point during the grow back phase has the divot ceased to become a divot and is now just, regular turf. So there's gray area there. But the other part that we always say too is, look, hey, yes, we've had bad lies in the fairway. We've all had a ball roll into a divot before in the middle of the fairway, but we've also all gotten really good lies in the rough. We've hit. Okay. The purpose of this rule is when the player's ball comes to rest, normally the player needs to accept the conditions that are going to be there, so the conditions affecting the stroke, and you're not allowed to improve them before you play the ball. So deal with what you got when your ball comes to rest. However, and this is the part where we'll cover the second half of this, there are some reasonable actions that the player is allowed to do, and even if in the course of taking those reasonable actions some improvement happens, that's okay. You're not going to get penalized. We are not going to cover Part C and Part D of this rule, but just know there are also some limited circumstances where if in the course of taking some action you realize some improvement has happened, but you haven't played the shot yet, there are some limited circumstances where you are allowed to repair that or get it back to the way it was to avoid penalty situations. Again, we're not going to cover that in this video, but if you want to learn more about that, please read those rules, read those interpretations, and call the Iowa Golf Association with any questions you might have. Okay, so we're going to cover the actions that are not allowed first, then we're going to cover the actions that are allowed. Okay, so to support the principle of playing the course as you find it, this rule, 8.1, does restrict what you're able to do to improve any of the protected conditions affecting the stroke. And this includes anything on or off the golf course. Off the golf course means out of bounds. It is specific to the next stroke the player is going to make. So it's kind of specific to what you have next. We're not going to anticipate where your ball could end up. So just know that these are specific to the next stroke. So first of all, before we talk about what improvement means, we probably need to figure out what are the conditions affecting the stroke. And there's 5 of them. You have the lie of the ball at rest, the area of your intended stance, the area of your intended swing, the line of play, and the line of play includes a reasonable distance on either side of it. And oh, by the way, the line of play doesn't have to be a straight line if you're playing a hook or a slice, draw, fade. And then those first 4 you really have with every shot in the game of golf. You're always going to have a lie. You're always going to have some sort of stance. You're always going to have some sort of swing. And you're always going to have some sort of line of play. The 5th one is a limited area. The 5th condition affecting the stroke is what we term the relief area, or any relief area when you are dropping a ball. Most of the time when we play the game, we don't have relief areas, but at some point we're all going to encounter that, whether it's because we hit it into a penalty area or we were on a cart path and we have to take a drop or whatever. But just know the first four we're always going to have. The fifth one, we don't always have that. And there's where we get the acronym of CATS, so conditions affecting the stroke. And just as a point of clarification or interpretation, the area of intended stance, it includes both where the player is going to place his or her feet, and it also includes the entire area where the body's going to go. So, your stance includes your whole body. It doesn't just include your feet. We have a video here of Keegan Bradley. It just kind of illustrates how. So in that video, you'll kind of see how, obviously, his stance is affected by where his feet go, but his stance is also affected by the tall grass and bush and stuff that's kind of hitting him, in the middle of the leg and then the lower back and things like that. So the area of intended swing includes the entire area that might reasonably affect any part of the backswing, the downswing, or the completion of the swing. So if you can kind of imagine, on a normal swing, it's kind of a big full circle of what would be the area of intended swing. Sometimes you don't have the big full circle. Maybe you're hitting a punch shot or some sort of knockdown shot where you don't take the club all the way back and you don't, really are able to come all the way through. In those cases, that area of intended swing is more of a half circle than a full circle. But usually, that picture on the right kind of illustrates what that area of intended swing is going to be. So the stance and the swing, intended stance and area of intended swing, we don't really have a definition for those. We just talked about what the definitions would be or considered to be. The terms lie, line of play, and relief area do actually have their own specific definition in the Rules of Golf book. And so you can look those up. But they're relatively easy to understand. The lie is the lie of the ball. It's where the ball's at. The line of play, like I said, it's the line the player wishes the ball to take. It does include a reasonable distance on either side of the line, whether that's a straight shot or trying to hit a little draw, little fade. Maybe they can't go right at the hole, so they're punching out, and there's some curve to what you're trying to do. And then the relief area is always a specified area. Usually it's going to be 1 club length. Sometimes it might be 2. There's a couple instances where it could be 2 club lengths. So now let's talk about what it means to improve, because that's really what this boils down to, is when we're talking about those 5 things, the conditions affecting the stroke, which are the lie of the ball, area of intended stance, area of intended swing, the line of play, and then sometimes the relief area, if we're dealing with the relief area situation. What this rule is really talking about is what constitutes improving one of those areas to the point where maybe we'd have a penalty. And what constitutes that is we have to alter one or more of the conditions affecting the stroke or other physical conditions affecting play so that the player gains a potential advantage for the stroke. So I'm going to show a couple of videos. In the first one, it's going to be very obvious where the player holds a single branch back so that it is no longer right in her backswing. That is definitely gaining a potential advantage. The second video, even though, it definitely looks way worse, it's actually a little bit harder for a rules official to determine whether the player has gained a potential advantage because there's so much stuff there, and you have to determine whether you think they actually cleared out enough room, so to speak, to where they actually did gain an advantage compared to when the ball first came to rest. So let me show these videos again. The first one is a definite penalty. The second one might still rise to the level of penalty, probably still rises to the level of penalty, but it is a lot tougher to determine. So even in that last one, like I said, it's, in my eyes, it's still a penalty, because I believe when the video starts, he does have some grass and stuff in his swing, and by the time he gets to when he actually makes the swing, he doesn't appear to really have grass in his backswing anymore. Definitely looks much more severe, but it does kind of illustrate what we mean by you have to gain an advantage based on your actions. Okay, so what's the lie? The lie is the spot on which a ball is at rest. It also includes any growing or attached natural objects, immovable obstructions, integral objects, or boundary objects that are touching the ball or right next to it. So things like a loose impediment or a movable obstruction would not be part of the lie of the ball. We are going to cover those in a subsequent video about what the rules are around moving those. But know that those aren't part of the lie of the ball. The line of play, it's the line where the player intends his or her ball to go after a stroke. Doesn't mean that's where the ball actually went, important to note, but it does mean where the player intended for it to go at the time of making the stroke. It does include the area on that line that is a reasonable distance above the ground and on either side of that line. And what's a reasonable distance? Well, a reasonable distance for a short shot, like this bunker shot in the picture on the right, or a little chip shot, there's going to be a smaller reasonable distance on either side of the line compared to a tee shot with a driver, for instance. The reasonable distance on either side of that is going to be a larger area. Like I said, line of play is not necessarily a straight line between 2 points. It could be a curved line based on where the player intends the ball to go, because that's how they want to play the shot, or there's wind that they're adjusting for, or what have you. Again, to support the principle of playing the course as you find it, this rule restricts what a player may do to improve any of these conditions affecting the stroke anywhere on or off the golf course, and off the golf course means out of bounds, and it is specific to the next stroke that the player will make. Just to cover them again: the lie of the player's ball at rest, area of intended stance, area of intended swing, line of play. We're always going to have those 4. The one we sometimes have is the relief area, the 5th one. And just to point something out, this rule applies to actions taken both during a round and if play is suspended due to weather or darkness or whatever, if a round has been stopped. Okay, this does not apply to the removal of loose impediments or movable obstructions, because we cover those specifically under Rule 15, and again, those are covered in a different video in this series. So please go and watch that video for the rules and instructions surrounding removal of loose impediments and movable obstructions. A player must not take any of these actions if they result in improving the conditions affecting the stroke. So, we cannot move, bend, or break any growing or attached natural object, such as the grass in the video we watched just a little bit ago. We cannot move an immovable obstruction, integral object, or boundary object. Boundary objects would be things that mark out of bounds, such as a white stake. It's a picture on the right. Chip Beck, I believe it is, who moves a white stake and then realizes he shouldn't have done that. I don't have a video of it, but that's kind of what's happening in that picture. And that is a penalty situation, because the removal of that boundary object resulted in an improvement for his area of intended swing, and also his area of intended stance, I believe. The player must not move, bend, or break any tee marker for the teeing area when playing a ball from that teeing area. It's important to read that again. The tee marker for the teeing area they're playing that day when they are playing a ball from that teeing area. Those tee markers, once you've started play of a hole, will actually transform themselves, something that you cannot move, into a movable obstruction once you've started play. A player must not move a loose impediment or a movable obstruction into a position to improve one of the conditions affecting the stroke. An example of this would be building a stance, such as moving a bench over so that they can stand on it to hit a shot from up in the tree, like in the picture. Maybe laying a towel down and leaning on that. The player must not alter the surface of the ground, including by replacing divots in a divot hole. In the picture on the right, the player is replacing a divot in a divot hole that results in improving her line of play. She's trying to play a shot low on the ground, and she has essentially made the ground a little bit smoother for herself by replacing that divot. Here's the video. So the divot was kind of there but wasn't really in the divot hole, so she kind of slides it in there and then goes back to playing her little chip and run shot. And it would make sense, if we're not going to allow you to replace divots in a divot hole that improve your conditions affecting the stroke, you're also not allowed to remove or press down divots that have already been replaced in order to smooth them out even more, or other cut turf that is already in place, or simply creating or eliminating holes, indentations, or uneven surfaces. So you're not allowed to smooth your path if it's on your line of play, or smooth things down if they're in your area of intended stance or right behind your ball to improve your lie, that sort of stuff. Again, not allowed to eliminate uneven surfaces. You must not remove or press down sand or loose soil in the general area. You are going to be allowed to do that on the putting green. We'll talk about that. Anywhere on the course other than the teeing area, you're not allowed to remove dew, frost, or water. So here's a video of someone using a towel to make themselves a nice little path to the hole. Maybe it should go without saying, but that would not be allowed. And if you breach any of these, so if you do any of those actions and it results in the improvement of a condition affecting the stroke, you're going to get the general penalty unless the improvement resulted from an action that you are allowed to do under the rules of golf. Let's stop and unpack that for a second. We just went over a bunch of stuff you're not allowed to do. Now we're going to go over a bunch of stuff that says, look, if you did some of the things we just said, as long as you did them while you were doing these things that we're going to talk about just now, you're going to be let off the hook. So it might almost be more beneficial to do this the other way around, where we say, look, you're going to be allowed to do these things in 8.1b that we're about to talk about. And if in the course of doing these things you happen to improve the conditions affecting the stroke, you're not going to be penalized. Okay, so let's talk about the actions that are allowed. And some of these are things that we all probably know already because it's stuff we do every day when we play golf. A player may take any of these actions and there's no penalty, even if doing so improves the conditions affecting the stroke. What are these things? Well, there's a few of them. One is you're allowed to fairly search for your ball. You can take reasonable actions to find and identify it. That means moving the grass around. If that, in the course of fairly searching for your ball, if that results in you improving your lie, as long as it was reasonable actions that you took to find it, you're not going to get penalized. If you take reasonable actions to remove loose impediments and movable obstructions, again, which we cover in a different video in this series, if that results consequently in some improvement of your lie or stance or swing or any of the conditions, you're not going to get penalized. Obviously, if the rules tell you you're allowed to mark the spot of a ball, lift and replace it, maybe it's because you're measuring for a ruling, because the putting green allows you to mark, lift, and clean your ball. Those things are reasonable and allowed under the game of golf. You're not going to get penalized if in the course of doing that, as long as you take reasonable actions, something gets improved. We're allowed to ground the club lightly right in front of or right behind the ball. Almost all of us do it right behind the ball. A few of us might also ground it lightly right in front of the ball. That's no penalty. We're allowed to do that. But keep in mind the word lightly. If you start doing it more than lightly, meaning you start pressing the club on the ground, that's not going to be allowed. So in the image on the right, you can see an indentation that's left in the sand after the player firmly pressed the club on the ground. That's a definite improvement of the lie of the ball, and it was through an action that's not allowed. Therefore, the player is going to get a penalty. And here's a video that shows the same. And just keep in mind, and we'll cover it under bunkers, we are not allowed to ground our club at all in a bunker. So when a ball's in the bunker touching the sand with your club right in front of or right behind the ball is not allowed. We're still not allowed to ground our club in a bunker. Let's get back to what you are allowed to do again, okay? You are allowed to firmly place your feet in taking a stance. You're also allowed a reasonable amount of digging in with the feet in sand or loose soil. Typically this happens in bunkers, but it could also be in waste areas, or, if you're playing, on a dunesy course, it could just be out in the rough. You might have a lot of sand and stuff you're dealing with. You're certainly allowed to dig your feet in, and here's an example of someone doing what would be considered reasonable. This is okay. Did they improve their area of stance? Yeah, they did. I mean, they dug in and got a little bit firmer grasp, but they did it via an action that is allowed. So therefore, there's no penalty. You're also allowed to fairly take a stance. This means you're allowed to take reasonable actions to get to the ball and take a stance. But keep in mind that you're not always going to be entitled to a normal stance or a normal swing, and that you have to take the least intrusive course of action to deal with the particular situation you have. So you're allowed to get in there. You're certainly allowed to take a stance. What you're not allowed to do is go in and with complete disregard for what is going on around you. You have to basically be as careful as you possibly can. And as long as you are being as careful as you possibly can, if something happens that results in improvement of the condition affecting the stroke for you, you would be absolved from penalty because you took the least intrusive action. If you make a stroke and that stroke results in improvement of your line of play or any other condition, that's okay. And I'll go back in the picture here, I think it's Bill Haas. If you can see, there's a ball directly behind a bush. The bush is right in his swing path, so he goes ahead and plays his shot, and in the course of making the stroke, he pretty much uproots the entire bush. That is not a penalty. If in the course of making a stroke during the back swing for the stroke, and the stroke is still made, if something happens to improve, you are not going to be penalized. I think we have a video here, and it'll be kind of hard to see, but watch closely, and what'll happen is on the backswing, they will uproot a bush or a patch of grass or something like that, but because they continue on with the swing, that's going to be okay. Nothing was improved, or I should say, the improvement was allowed because they continued on with the swing. Again, when the ball is in the bunker, touching the sand in the bunker, including during the backswing, is not allowed. So the video we just watched, the reason why that was okay is because it was not in a bunker. If he had done that in a bunker on the course of his backswing and hit the sand, that would have been a problem. And we have a little video to see here. It's, again, just watch closely. You'll notice on the backswing they kind of drag the club along the sand, and that is a penalty situation. Okay, now let's talk specifically about the teeing area, because you are allowed to do a lot of stuff there that you're not allowed to do anywhere on the golf course. And one is you're allowed to tee the ball up. Another is you actually are allowed to move, bend, or break anything growing or attached that's a natural object. A lot of people will pick up some grass or kind of break a stick or something that's in the teeing area. They're allowed to do that. You're also allowed to alter the surface of the ground. Laura Davies is famous for this. She doesn't really use a traditional tee. What she does is creates an imperfection and then tees the ball up on that imperfection. So that is actually what she does here, is creates that lump of grass that she then tees the ball up on. And finally, in the teeing area, there is no penalty if you remove or press down sand or soil, or remove dew, frost, or water. So sand or loose soil, we can remove that on the putting green. We can also remove it on the teeing area, but we cannot anywhere else. Dew, frost, or water, we're only allowed to remove that on the teeing area. We cannot remove that anywhere else, including the putting green. And then in a bunker, we are allowed to smooth sand to care for the course after we've played a ball from the bunker outside the bunker. So after we've played our bunker shot and it's been extricated from the bunker, no matter where it ends up, as long as it's not in that bunker anymore, then we're allowed to smooth sand to care for the course. And here's a little diagram description of that. We have a player who, for some reason, is going to play the ball backwards in the bunker. The white circle is his ball, and the gray ovals are his feet. So he will play the ball backwards. So even though, and then walk out of the bunker, and even though that is all on his new line of play, this rule tells us, look, we've extricated the ball from the bunker, therefore we're allowed to smooth sand to care for the course, even if that results in improvement on our condition affecting the stroke, which in this case was our line of play. So that's going to be okay. Okay, on a putting green, we can remove sand and loose soil. We can also repair damage, and we're going to talk specifically about that in a subsequent video in this series. We're also allowed anywhere on the course, because when we get to the loose impediment and movable obstruction portion, you're going to notice that there's certain rules that tie into what you can do with loose impediments. So sometimes we're not sure if a natural object is loose or if it's still growing. So we are allowed to move a natural object to see if it is loose. But if we find that that object is growing or attached, then we have to leave it attached. It has to stay attached, and we also have to return it as nearly as possible to the original position. So that's Rule 8, course played as it is found, one of the principles, certainly, of the game of golf. The prevailing sentiment is if you tee off on a hole and you never touch your golf ball and only hit the shot and don't mess with the course at all, you're never going to get penalized. Unfortunately, it's not always possible. We hit the ball in certain places that we have to deal with touching our golf ball, or certain places where, look, there's nothing we can do except to tramps down some grass or move some things that maybe we otherwise shouldn't move. But if we're doing those things in the course of the actions we outline that are allowed, we're going to avoid penalty. Thanks a lot for joining us.